I have some headphones connected, but if they're... Yeah, is that better?
Excellent, mate. Can hear you good as.
Okay, well, I'll do an introduction anyway for our final speaker today. He's from America as well, an ex-DoD intelligence staff filmmaker and author. He's going to present a condensed testimony of his recent journey from top positions in government to flat earth knowledge. Ronald Farnham helps us to understand who we really are as sovereign souls and believes that he has a blueprint required to end war and poverty. So we definitely need to listen to that. He has given his latest book, The Solution to You, as a gift. No? Okay, I won't read that sentence. Cross it out.
It's going to be published and people will get.
All right, so he's written a book, The Solution, which I'm sure is going to be a top seller. It's probably available on the internet or through email connections via fins here.
I'm all ready too.
How come he's still on the screen?
Okay, hopefully, please welcome Ronald. Clap, clap.
All right.
I was Army intelligence for 8 years and a Korean linguist. So I went to basic training, then language school, then intelligence cryptanalysis school, then a field deployable radar school, and then I went to Korea for a year where I worked on collecting on North Korea. I was in Korea 96 to 97. The communism versus democracy world is just a ploy to make everything so-called democracy, yet it's a socialist kind of... We're headed toward the one world government.
The global military-industrial complex.
Film an expedition from the tip of South America through the Antarctic, out the other side, allegedly, of the Antarctic to Australia. I tried to do that. I was being recruited by the Sci-Fi Channel through a producer who was pitching our show, my wife and I's show, called The Truth Seekers. We were going to be called The Infiltrators, and I told them, okay, great. We were all on board. It was going to be a conspiracy theory show. And my first episode, I told them, I had it all written out, and I said, here's what we're going to do the first episode to get to the bottom of the truth. We're going to go from South America in through Antarctica, out the other side to Australia to prove one way or another the shape of the Earth. They shut it down immediately, stopped communicating with me, and that was the end of our TV show deal with the Sci-Fi Channel. I have the video of that I can send you to where they put together our 2-minute trailer for the Sci-Fi Channel. I was DoD, Army Intelligence, and I had a top secret clearance for 15 years. Trained in the intelligence world. I taught SOCOM intelligence analysts how to exploit actionable intelligence for special operations worldwide. I got out of the Department of Defense when they turned down my solution to end terrorist activity. Look at morals and dogma and masonry worldwide. It's actually the template for leaders to control people with through symbols and numbers.
All right. Well, first, thanks for having me. This is a special show for me. And my goal here is to help end this controversial conspiracy paranormal issue that's going on right now, just across Earth, it seems. You know?
Yeah.
And that issue is the shape of the Earth. And what is the true nature of reality? You know, are we living on a spinning globe, or are we on a flat plane? Or is it something else? Tonight I want to answer that question, or today, I know it's nighttime here, so I'm going to answer this though once and for all, at least for me anyway, because I feel like I got to get this off my chest about where I stand on the nature of reality. All right, so Earth, what is it? Reality, what is it? Now, according to the brightest physicists in the world, matter is made up of just a few tiny particles, electrons and up and down quarks. And science, though, has admitted that the word particle is the wrong word to be using. Physicists at CERN, the Hadron Collider, they say the particle is not an accurate word. What we ought to use instead is field, a field of energy. All this time you thought your world is made of particles. It's not composed of particles, but rather fields of toroidal energy. And these toroidal fields that are composed of electrons and up and down quarks directly respond to your consciousness. Your reality is made to appear solid due to your consciousness and your perception from behind the ether. And your consciousness is on the invisible side of the ether, and your world is displayed on the apparently physical side of the ether. So your world is both a spinning globe and a flat plane, and it's also a toroidal field of energy. But your government / control mind refuses to show you live footage of your Earth because it will eliminate this globe versus flat Earth debate. What you would see if they could get high enough, I believe, is to show you that you would see that the Earth is a live field of toroidal energy. And so, but I have to start at the beginning of the answer and lay the groundwork so you can follow where I'm coming from on this. And I've done the research and taken this information from the most visible and in-depth source of physics today, and that is from the recent science coming out of the Large Hadron Collider at CERN. So as you probably all know, on July 4th, 2012, CERN announced they found a new Higgs boson particle that had been predicted in 1964. And CERN is the European Organization for Nuclear Research, just outside of Geneva, with a population of 7,000 physicists who do research there on particle physics. To understand what a Higgs boson is, we have to go through a lesson on particle physics. I had to do it. You guys are going to have to hear this. This is important to understand where I'm going with and why we create reality through observation. So the standing theory is that the universe is made of more than 100 different chemical elements. Everything is made of these chemical elements per the periodic table of elements that you learned about in school. For every element, there's an atom that was previously thought to be just the fundamental thing, the thing. Everything was made of an atom. And that was the Victorian view of matter. But in 1897, the electron was discovered. And this led to a revision of the structure of the atom that had previously been thought to be hard, indestructible, and indivisible. When the electron was discovered, that was revised. The whole model was revised, and we got the model of the atom that we now learn in school. The model with the nucleus that contains the mass of the atom and the positively, charged, and around the atom go these electrons. And on the periodic table of elements, there's a pattern to the properties of these elements. And the group 1 elements react in similar ways, and they get more reactive as you go down. And there's clear patterns. There's clear patterns in the way the elements are arranged, and that is indicative of a deeper structure which can be explained by different numbers of electrons going around atoms. It's the electrons that determine the chemical properties of any element. And it was discovered in the 1930s that the nucleus then is made of smaller things called protons and neutrons that make up most of the mass of the atom and are heavier and much more massive than electrons. The proton's positively charged and the neutron is electrically neutral. Then in the 60s it was discovered that there are even smaller particles or fields that make up protons and neutrons called quarks. The proton is made of 2 up quarks and 1 down quark, and the neutron is made of 2 down quarks and 1 up quark. And that's it. Everything that exists is made of these 3 particles, electrons and up and down quarks. You are quarks, all of you, me, everything, you are quarks and electrons just arranged in an interesting way. And these are the first of the three particles of what your standard model. However, what the powers that be, and let's just call the Federal Reserve banks, the governments, the states, whoever's oppressing you, the Federal Reserve banking system, it's all just this is the powers that be. I would say these are the guys in the real know, the bankers, the Illuminati, the Vatican, the Jesuits, the Black Pope, just everyone that you can consider as the powers that be or that are oppressing us from learning the truth. The powers that be do not want you to know that there is another scientific model that they do know about, but they refuse to share with you, and they refuse to share it because they want to control you. They want to continue control. Your ignorance, our ignorance is their bliss, so to speak. So the standard model of particle physics is a boring name for something that's extraordinary, okay? Because this standard model does not include gravity. And I'm going to explain gravity tonight and tell you what it is, and you'll finally have an answer for that. But other than that, they are telling you that that is what everything is. This brings us to this ghost-like invisible particle called the neutrino, which I think is actually the soul, or a part of what our consciousness is. There's trillions of them, they say, going through you right now, or really traveling through space and time as we know it. They're allegedly created by the sun in vast quantities, and they go straight through you, straight through the earth, and science says that they very rarely interact with the ordinary matter out of which we are made. So these four particles make up what modern science calls the first generation of matter. And then science tells you that for some reason, they're not sure about, but the nature of reality has given 2 additional copies of these particles. Science doesn't know why. And they refer to them as the second generation. In this so-called second generation, all of the particles are exactly the same as in the first generation, except that they're more massive and more unstable. For example, the electron has a heavy cousin called the muon, which they say is 200 times more massive than the electron. And these muons quickly decay into an electron and some neutrinos. And so they don't hang around long and they're unstable, but they can make them in high energy collisions at CERN's Large Hadron Collider. That's what they are doing there, part of what they're doing. Now there's a third generation that's even heavier, and science says they have no idea why they exist. In fact, you're going to find out in my presentation that science doesn't know a lot about what's going on, and that's what they're claiming, at least that side of science. That, not the powers that be science, because the powers that be science, I think they know everything, and they probably known it for thousands of years. But modern day science on the surface is saying that they see the structure and the pattern, but they tell us, that they don't know what underlies it. They see the structure, they see a pattern, but they don't know what it is that underlies it. They say it suggests there's something deeper that's responsible for these particular matter particles or fields. And the last ingredient in the standard model are the 3 fundamental force particles. The first and most important and the strongest of the 3 force particles or fields is electromagnetism. And this is going to come down to everything. This is going to explain everything, electromagnetism. That's the force that causes the electrons to stick to the nuclei of atoms. It binds atoms together. It's responsible for chemistry and most of the stuff that's important to us. The particle that transmits the electromagnetic interaction is the photon, the particle of light. And so light itself is also an electromagnetic phenomenon. Now there are 3 other particles that glue on, and that glues things. It's the strong nuclear force particle, and that binds quarks together inside the atomic nucleus. It binds protons and neutrons together. Now there are 2 other weird particles called the W and Z particles. These particles transmit a third and even weirder force called the weak nuclear force. The weak nuclear force doesn't really bind things together like electromagnetism or the strong force. This force is responsible for causing particles to decay. When a mu1 turns into an electron, that happens through the weak force. If the weak force wasn't there, science tells us the sun wouldn't fuse hydrogen into helium, and there wouldn't be any so-called matter in the universe. So this is how science sees reality. A lot of electromagnetic fields working together to make your reality. But remember, these are not particles, they say. They are really fields of energy. Everything is a field of energy and not a solid particle. This was the standard model as of the 3rd of July 2012. At that point, the only piece missing in the Higgs was the Higgs boson particle. And what is the Higgs boson particle? I'm sure a lot of you already know, but it's important to get to the bottom line of what my presentation is tonight. Why is the Higgs boson particle important? So to understand that, ask a deeper question. What does science mean by a particle? Science has made these particles sound like little Lego bricks. And I'm beating this point into the ground, obviously. Like little Lego bricks, like solid points that move around and stick together. That's not what, in reality, modern particle physics tells you what particles are. The field of study, particle physics, they say is badly named. They admit this. What you're being told are particles are actually fields. Not particles, but fields, okay? So from here on in, I'm replacing the word particle with field. You have to change your wording to change your reality. That's what I do, and I'm asking that you guys do this. Change the word particle to field. I've talked about this at least 3 times now in this presentation because I want to help rewire your brain. I've had to rewire my brain and all the different things I've learned, like becoming, a different person. So you're there rewiring your brain and your programming that you've received about the nature of your reality since birth. So we are fields of energy and we live in fields of energy. Hold a magnet, you get a fridge magnet, you hold a magnet next to your fridge or a piece of steel, and you can feel the effect of a field. A field is something that causes a force to be exerted over a distance where there is nothing physical actually causing that force to be exerted. A magnetic field can be strong near a magnet and grow weaker as you pull it away. It can be so-called gravitational. It can be called a gravitational field. And I'm going to explain why. Every so-called particle has an associated field, that's what science says. There is a field for the quarks, the electrons, the neutrinos, and for all of the force particles. The way science sees these particles is that they are like tiny ripples moving through these fields. So it's fields moving through fields, or moving through the ether. They're small, localized disturbances in these fields. And that's how science thinks of all matter. Electrons, quarks, everything are just little ripples moving through cosmic energy fields that fill all of space everywhere. What is the Higgs field? In the 1960s, when the standard model was being put together, it was discovered that if science tried to make the particles in the standard model massive, then their theory broke down and gave the science community nonsensical answers to their theories. There was a particular problem with the W and Z particles, which emit the weak nuclear force. It was thought by the scientific community that if they existed, then they had to be extremely massive. But if they gave them mass in the theory, then the theory gave nonsensical answers. There had to be some solution to this. And the solution was for science to invent another field. So Peter Higgs said, imagine if there is, throughout the entire universe, an additional cosmic quantum field. And particles we think are massive move through it. And as they do, they're imbued with mass by this field. For example, the electron, which has a certain mass. What the Higgs mechanism theorizes is that the electron is massless, but by interacting with this cosmic energy field, it acquires the properties of mass. Higgs attempted to connect this theory to something that could be experimentally measured. And what he added to his theory was one line that read, quote, if this cosmic energy field that gives mass to all the particles exists, then you should be able to create a ripple or disturbance in it, which would show up as a new particle or field. And that ripple in the Higgs field is what science calls the Higgs boson. So the thing that gives mass to all of these fields we're made of is this field, they're saying, the Higgs boson. Is science's proof that this field is out there, and that's why finding it was so important, because the Higgs mechanism, this Higgs process by which the particles get mass, is absolutely fundamental to the Standard Model. It's the keystone. If you take it away, the whole theory falls in on itself. Science was convinced that this field must be out there. That's why finding it was crucial. The Higgs completes the scientific community's standard model of particle physics. This theory is used to explain all of their physics. How a light bulb produces photons, how atoms are fused together inside stars. It's the closest science has to a theory of everything. Now, here's what is hidden in plain sight, which I think everything, your truths are all hidden in plain sight. I think it's a rule of the Illuminati. They have to hide information in plain sight. They can't keep it from you. You just have to know how to be able to look for it. So what's hidden in plain sight is the electron has an electrical charge and behaves like a magnet. It has a north and a south pole, and it gives off a magnetic field. This is what I believe gravity is. Electromagnetism. You stick to the ground because it has more electrons. The ground has more electrons than you do. You're a smaller magnet, and the ground you stand on has more electrons and magnetizes you to the ground. Physicists use the Standard Model to calculate how strong the electron's magnetism is. And they do this to absolute fantastic precision with supercomputers by putting the theory into the computer and precisely calculating with a very small uncertainty. So science theoretically predicts and measures accurately to 1 part in a billion. The Standard Model is a stunningly successful theory for them, but not without problems, which motivated the building of the Large Hadron Collider, as well as the discovery of the Higgs, which closed the chapter of 20th century physics, which everyone was actually really after, was the big unsolved questions that the Standard Model cannot answer. So there's something that I got to talk about called gravitational lensing. And this is the science theory about what gravity might be. And they call it gravitational lensing regarding light from allegedly distant galaxies. And I say allegedly because, you know, we haven't been, I don't know if we've been out there. Have we really gone outside the alleged dome into space? So this gravitational lensing regarding light from distant galaxies travels towards Earth. And Einstein's theory is that gravity makes matter move in orbits or curves. That's gravity that's causing light and energy to move in orbits and curves and space and time, and causes light to travel in curved paths. So current science would say to you that what's happening is, imagine you have a galaxy over here on this side that's emitting light, and you've got the Earth or a planet over here, and then you have a heavy object in the middle. If there's something heavy in between them, the galaxy and the Earth, the light leaves the galaxy, travels towards the Earth, and as it goes past this heavy object, it's bent by the gravity of the heavy object and then pulled backward toward the Earth again. And it acts like a lens. And you see a smeared image, they say, of the galaxy across the sky. And science alleges that they can use this lensing effect to work out, you know, theoretically and mathematically, how much matter there is in the center of a galaxy, because the more gravity, the more mass there is, the more pronounced the gravitational lensing effect will be. But again, I believe it's merely magnetism. And gravity is being called gravity when really it is just magnetism by a higher number of electrons versus a smaller number of electrons. It's magnetism. Gravity is the wrong word, just like particle is the wrong word used for field in physics. Now, science has also found evidence of something called dark matter, which is essentially some kind of invisible substance which science claims it doesn't know what it is. It allegedly makes up a very large fraction of the universe, and physicists claim that it's far more abundant than the atomic matter that the Standard Model describes. And their evidence of dark matter comes from so-called gravitational lensing, and from simulations that science claims to show how the universe formed. Science says that if you want to show how a structure in the universe formed, you need dark matter. If you don't put dark matter into your simulation, then you don't get a universe that looks like the one that we live in. They need dark matter to make their theory work and to agree with what they allege that they see out there in the sky, and through techniques, through lensing, and by looking at the rotations of stars around galaxies. And they allege that they can calculate to a fairly high degree of confidence how much dark matter is out there, even though they can't see it. They give you pictures of a cosmic pie and have labeled everything seen when looking up at the sky. All the galaxies and stars and planets in the universe, and everything the Standard Model describes is just 5% of the total content of the universe, they say. They say 95% of the universe is made of invisible dark matter, and they don't know what that is. And they say 68% is something called dark energy, and they really don't know what that is. They say dark energy is some kind of mysterious, repulsive force that appears to be causing the universe to expand at an ever-increasing rate. But they go on to say the lesson from this is essentially, when you hear the word dark in physics, to get very suspicious, because it basically means they don't know what they're talking about. I think it's the ether. And I'm going to get into the ether, where we are on one side and in the ether. So physicists have constructed what seems to be a stunningly successful theory over a century with clever experiments and theories. And then you realize that what they've been describing is a tiny fraction of the total content of the universe. They have a theory that works really well in the very narrow domain in which they've applied it, but tells us nothing about 95% of existence, probably even 99%. That's a huge omission in the Standard Model. Another problem, besides science claiming to not know what 95% of the universe is, has to do with something called antimatter. All the matter fields such as quarks, electrons, and neutrinos, for each of those particles or fields, there's a mirror image field, science says. Science claims that this has long been known and was discovered and predicted by Paul Dirac, and then discovered in experiments shortly afterwards. I don't know if I believe that. They say each mirror image field retains all the properties exactly the same, but the electric charge is the other way around. For example, the electron, which is negatively charged, has a positively charged version called the positron, or the anti-electron. Muons have an anti-muon, the up quark has the anti-up quark, there's an anti-down quark, and etc. These are also part of the Standard Model. These things they claim exist and can be created very reliably in experiments and where they can study their properties. Science claims to know they're out there and says they are indistinguishable from the matter fields except for their charges being the other way around. This is a problem because if they apply this kind of understanding of matter, antimatter to the formation of the universe, then this is what happens. They say at the Big Bang there's a huge amount of energy. That energy is converted into matter and antimatter. In the Standard Model, whenever you make a matter particle field, you also have to make the corresponding antimatter particle / field. If science makes an electron, they also have to make it with the positron. All these fields, anti-fields, being created at the same time, they're being created. They say they bump into each other, they annihilate and turn back into light. So this alleged interchange between energy and matter and antimatter is boiling and boiling away, and then eventually they claim what happens is the universe expands enough that it cools down low enough that all the matter, antimatter meet up, annihilate each other, and what you're left with is a cold, dark, and lifeless universe with a few photons whizzing through the infinite blackness. This is what the Standard Model says. So they admit that the existence of us and galaxies is a major inconvenience to their theories because they claim that they can't understand it. They claim, however, that there is a process by which they can also, measure matter, and that matter would be able to survive this cosmic annihilation at the beginning of the universe by calculating how there's an imbalance that could be there, which they claim is very tiny. And they state that if they look at the sky and count the number of, they say this, that if they look at the sky and count the number of photons whizzing through space, there's a rough correspondence between how many photons there are out there and how many particles and antiparticles annihilated at the beginning, because every annihilation more or less leaves 2 photons. There are about 1 billion photons for every atom in the universe. They say that tells them that we are 1 billionth left over of a much larger amount of stuff, they call it, that was there at the beginning. Stuff. They said stuff. But they don't know how this billionth survived, and they say it shouldn't be there. They should have all been wiped out, and we shouldn't be here. Big problem. Science says they don't know that 95%, they don't know what 95% of the universe is, and the theory tells them the universe shouldn't exist. But I believe that the science that the powers that be uses, I think they do know everything. And I'm going to tell you what I think that they do know. Science also has a third problem, since Einstein, gravity. Although gravity feels strong, it sticks us to the floor, it's actually a fantastically weak force. Science claims the Earth has a gravitational attraction. They also claim that the electromagnetic force is much stronger than gravity. I believe, however, that electromagnetism or electron magnetism is responsible for the unseen force known as gravitation. Because electrons have a magnetic field. They are a magnetic field. And if everything is made of electrons, then everything is a magnetic field. The ground has more electrons than a human, than you and I. So the magnetic power of the ground is stronger than your magnetic amount just due to the sheer number of electrons the ground has versus what you have. And so the ground has a gravitational pull on you via magnetism. Gravity is a byproduct of electron magnetism. And that solves that issue and explains it right there. Gravity is electron magnetism created by the unseen magnetic force of electrons. Surface science, not the powers that be science, says the strong force, the weak force, and electromagnetism are all much stronger than gravity, and they don't understand why. I just told you why. There's not really such a thing as gravity, let's say. What science thinks is gravity really is the magnetism of electrons. I like to repeat myself, yes. But the Large Hadron Collider at CERN, so they say, was built to try to solve their lack of knowledge or truthfulness. They also claim that there are some possible theories out there that could explain some of these problems. One of their most popular is an idea called supersymmetry. This is their idea. I'm not making this up. This is from their information, from CERN. This is the idea to invoke a new kind of symmetry into nature, a rather odd symmetry. It's not really like this mirror image of antimatter, but it's comparable to it. In supersymmetry, there's a symmetry between the matter particles like quarks and electrons and neutrinos, and the force particles, which are the gluons, the photons, and the weak force, and the Higgs. In supersymmetry, every matter field gets a force particle or field partner, and every force field gets a matter field partner. So science created an extra table of fields with admittedly stupid names. Stupid, that's what they said. Admittedly stupid names. A field's name in supersymmetry has an S in front of it. The electron field becomes the selectron, the muon becomes the smuon, the quark becomes the squark, and they're called sparticles, but really S fields or fields. So the interest in supersymmetry for them began in the 80s, and it's been the most popular extension of the standard model for a long time because making up some ridiculous theory solves science's problems. making up some ridiculous theories solve science's problems, particularly the problem of dark matter. One of the reasons that supersymmetry is very popular with particle or field physics is that the lightest particle is stable and also electrically neutral. That's why they want and they need dark matter. Dark matter is invisible. They tell us because it doesn't reflect, absorb, or emit light. Things that don't emit, absorb, or reflect lights are electrically neutral. They have an electrically neutral field they call a particle that does not interact with photons. It could make up the dark matter in the universe. That's their theory. That's one reason for liking supersymmetry. That's why they like it. They have an obsession in physics to unify things, to simplify complicated phenomena into a single underlying phenomena that they call with the forces and that they use for the force particles. Unifying the different forces in physics has been an ongoing quest since Maxwell unified electricity and magnetism in his equations. Now, I believe that the field that they cannot identify is the field of consciousness. That is on the other side of the ether, which they, I believe, are attempting to contact or get to or disturb by smashing photons together in the Large Hadron Collider at CERN. And the powers that be know about the field of consciousness and how to control it. They don't want you and I to know how to control it, and they don't want you and I to know that we are literally creating our reality with our mind's eye, and that electrons obey our subconscious commands, or our subconscious wave patterns that we put out that bring us back a standing wave, and our physical reality. Science says that the strength of 3 different forces in the standard model changes as you go higher and higher in energy. So the collider bashes particles into each other. The harder science hits them into each other, the strength of the forces is altered. In the standard model, they do experiments at higher and higher categories and higher energies. Energies that are higher than they can produce in an experiment. But this is done with theoretical calculations. At some very high energy scale, there's a point where the electromagnetic force, the weak force, and the strong force all come together, but not quite. If you introduce supersymmetry, you have to introduce supersymmetry for this unification. These forces meet rather exactly at a particular place labeled by them as unification, which suggests that with supersymmetry, these 3 forces are unified into some single overlying force, which could be called the force. And that's another reason science likes supersymmetry. It unifies 3 apparently disparate forces into one. So science also claims they've already unified electron magnetism and the weak force. That's particularly what the Higgs is involved in. The other reason science likes supersymmetry is that they double the number of fundamental fields or particles to discover. And what does this do? If they double the number of particles that they got to go discover, this is going to keep physicists employed for a very long time. Is that good for the tax dollars of the 21 member countries that pay the CERN budget? Is it? But they love supersymmetry, just like NASA loves space. And another possible theory they try to explain with supersymmetry is the weakness of gravity. Their theory posits an extra dimension of space. This is what they say about the weakness of gravity. They thought of an extra dimension of space, and sometimes more than an extra dimension, many extra dimensions, as a way of explaining the weakness of gravity. Now, in my opinion, again, that dimension is consciousness. But their idea is that with the extra dimensions, that matter and the directions in space and time for us are up, down, left, right, forwards, and backwards. And the reason that we don't observe these other dimensions is because the field particles that we're made of and stick to on these 3 dimensions are in space and time, and they can't travel through to these higher dimensions. Excuse me. Or It's because these extra dimensions are squished up or very tiny, and therefore they're impossible to observe. That's what science says. The way they explain the weakness of gravity is usually by gravity, they say it leaking away into these extra dimensions. So gravity can move through all the other dimensions of space, and therefore it's diluted. And whereas electromagnetism is restricted to just live inside these three dimensions. These three dimensions that we're familiar with. And if you want to know the results of having extra dimensional theories, like theirs, that they say that they would make a black hole at CERN and it would swallow the whole world. So they haven't really seen that yet. They make extra dimensional theories and theoretically make tiny black holes, where they collide field particles, theoretically, mathematically, with enough energy that collapses a little region of space-time for a tiny moment into a black hole. And they claim the reason they're not really worried about these black holes, happening within the collider at CERN, is because they don't think it'll eat the Earth, because Stephen Hawking's theory that black holes should almost immediately evaporate as soon as they've been created. So they're not worried about a potential black hole being created when they smash these electrons. They think they're just gonna evaporate and they wouldn't swallow us whole, like Jaws of the universe. So finding the Higgs was one objective, but finding all these things was a really big part of the reason that the Large Hadron Collider was built, which is a 27-kilometer long Large Hadron Collider. It's the largest scientific instrument ever built by the human race. It crosses the Swiss-France border twice. And it's about 100 meters under the ground, they say, not because it's dangerous and emits lots of radiation that we need to be shielded from. No, they say it's underground because it would be very expensive to buy kilometers of land and build it on, so it's just below the surface. And here's how it works. At CERN, there's a bottle of hydrogen gas that's plugged into a meter-long particle accelerator. And the hydrogen is taken out of the canister, zapped with an electrical field. The hydrogen atoms are ripped apart. The electrons are ripped off the hydrogen atoms, and that leaves the protons, which are the nuclei of the hydrogen atoms. And those are sent through a series of accelerators at CERN, moving through a number of different loops. Eventually it goes into a ring called, and I'm going to get to rings. Eventually these protons go through a ring called the superproton synchrotron, which in the 80s was the largest particle accelerator in the world, but now it's a feeder for the much bigger Large Hadron Collider. So a beam of protons goes one way, and another beam of protons going in the opposite direction, and at 4 points around this ring, these protons are brought into a collision, and three-dimensional digital cameras take photographs of these collisions, so they see if they've created new particles. Now, the collider is bathed in liquid helium at -1 degree Celsius, just above absolute zero. The lowest possible temperature, because these fields are steered around the ring by powerful magnets that are superconducting, meaning they have no electrical resistance, and they can create extremely strong magnetic fields, but only at very low temperatures. The machine's cooled with liquid helium pumped intravenously through the entire ring to make the magnets operate. It uses gigantic 3D digital cameras. When the protons enter from the opposite directions through the beam pipe, they collide in the center, create a load of fields going everywhere, and the detector records the collisions in real time, 1,000,000 times per second. The biggest of all of the detonation chambers is Atlas, as in the title of the Ayn Rand book, Atlas Shrugged. They collide the two protons in an effort to make matter. So that's why they're colliding this. These particles, or field accelerators or colliders, are described as atom smashers, which suggests that what they're doing is breaking atoms apart in order to see what's inside them. That's not really what they say that they're interested there at CERN. What particle or field colliders are ways of making matter that doesn't normally exist in the universe. And I think they're trying to tap into consciousness. I think they might be trying to pull consciousness into matter artificially. Maybe artificial intelligence to a certain degree, I don't know. But they load a huge amount of energy onto each proton. They're given huge speeds at 99.999% the speed of light, where they collide, at which point they're carrying 7,000 times their rest mass as kinetic energy. Means they can make something like, that's 1,000 times heavier than a proton in the collision. And they come together and their kinetic energy is converted into matter. Hundreds of particles or fields are created. And these are not things that are coming from inside the proton. It's fields being made from kinetic energy. This collisions process happens 40 million times every second inside 4 colliders, running most of the year, 24 hours a day. That's a vast amount of collisions produced. The data challenges of coping with this rate of collisions is extraordinary, they say at CERN. So how did they find the Higgs boson? Two protons collide, and if science is lucky, they will create a Higgs field, if they're lucky. The physicists at CERN say that the Higgs field lives for a tiny fraction of a second, too short to be detected. The Higgs doesn't ever reach, the particle, the Higgs boson, doesn't even reach the detector. It's created and it disintegrates instantly, they say. One way it decays is into 2 particles of light, 2 high energy photons. So when the Higgs was discovered, 2 gamma rays flew out from the collision points that came from the Higgs decay, and this event happened in the Atlas. The analyst looking for the Higgs, he goes through all of the trillions and trillions and trillions of collisions and finds all of the collisions where there were 2 high energy photons produced because they might have come from a Higgs boson. And then they take the energy of those 2 photons, add them together, and work out what was the mass of the object which they came from. That created right there at the center of that, at that annihilation, at that moment of impact. And they show how it decayed. So they analyze these pair of photons, calculate the total energy, plot it on a graph on a vertical axis, and then they put the mass on the horizontal axis. And this tells them that they have a bump in their graph. And then that's what they say the Higgs is. They said the reason the Higgs find was important was a certain mass, which is 125 times more or less the mass of a proton. And they saw little excess because when they saw the excess, it shifted the states and the collision. The photons should always have a mass. Well, they get a little extra for photons. And that's what happened on July 4, 2012. That was experiment happened at the Atlas and the CMS, both with a bump at the same time, at the same place. And that's why everyone got excited. So I know I only have about 4 minutes left, so I'm going to get through this fast. So stick with me because the finale is going to be good. So the LHC ran for 2.5 years until the Higgs was found. And since then, there's been a string of bad news. Before the Higgs was found, certain results caused problems for some of the theories that they were looking for, particularly supersymmetry. CERN thought that when the LHC was first switched on that there would be many supersymmetrical particles, but what happened is there's not been a sign of one of them at all. It's been 7 years since the Higgs was allegedly discovered, and not much has happened since. They claim to be studying the Higgs, and that they're trying to pin down the standard model Higgs boson that Peter Higgs said should be there. Or is it some other exotic type of field? And for the extra dimensions and supersymmetry, so far they claim there hasn't been any sign of them. I think science on the surface is just toying with us and hiding the power of our consciousness from us. It's a stall tactic. So science on the surface tells you they don't know what the other field is, but the powers that be do. And I'm going to explain to you what they know and what I think that they don't want you to know and why. The other fields they claim to be looking for are your consciousness and the ether. That's what I think they're looking for, consciousness and the ether. You are consciousness. You're a toroidal field of electrons, of electron magnetic energy. Every field or particle is a toroidal field of energy. The Earth is a gigantic toroidal field of energy. And the toroidal ring is how the electron is magnetic. It's a plasmoidal ring. It's got an orbiting charge. The toroidal ring is a collection of infinitesimal charging elements which orbit along a common continuous loop that you could call the ring. It maintains its shape and configuration. And the ring as a whole doesn't radiate due to changes in magnetic fields since it remains stationary. So the ring produces a magnetic field or a spin due to the current or the charging element. And this comes from Planck's constant and the conservation of energy. And there's an equation for it. And I'm not going to go through it for time's sake. But electrons in up and down quartz can be viewed as bundles and fibers, and the toroidal or helicon doesn't need a constant radius or internal energy for a particle. Its shape, size, and motion adjust according to the external electromagnetic fields from its environment. That's important. These adjustments, this is how particles link together and form atoms, okay? So your consciousness lives in two places. It lives on the other side of the unseen ether. The ether is the medium in which your consciousness operates within this toroidal ring. So your consciousness looks into the ether, and based on observation, it turns toroidal fields into apparently physical objects. It creates your physical body and everything around you, and it sends out waves that return waves to you. You create your reality, and you emit a signal that goes into the ether and returns to you the waves you emit. But it returns those waves in apparently physical form. So if you're emitting a wave that the Earth is a spinning globe, then that's how your mind is going to be programmed to see it. That's how your apparent physical reality is going to be. It's going to see a globe. It will come back to you. If you emit a wave or believe that it's a flat or a concave or a hollow plane or Earth, then that's what will be returned to you as a standing wave in space-time and apparent matter. But in reality, everything from the smallest electron to the quark to the so-called and alleged planet are toroidal ring fields of energy. They have no mass until you observe them and give them mass. They're toroidal fields until you observe them and give them their apparent physical reality. You are formless consciousness that creates the formed physical in which you live. And based on what you truly believe, you create that physical form. So who's controlling your mind? What is controlling your mind? Your consciousness. Are you controlling it, or is the corporation that's posing as a government controlling it? Is the mass media and the US of A Corporation's Department of Education or your government's New Zealand's Department of Education controlling your mind? Can you cast aside all of your beliefs and start anew, knowing that you're a captain of your ship, that you control the electron magnetic toroidal rings? You are the Lord of the Rings. So, they don't want us to harness our true creative power. That's why they're hypnotizing us with the flat versus globe debate. With TV and movies and music and food and work and the monetary system and politics, it's all a shell game to hide our true creative power from us. You're literally creators in this apparently physical world. And when you look back at the dollar bill, you see on the back of the bill, there's an eye on the top of a pyramid. What's that telling you? It's saying that your subconscious eye mixes with your physical eyes and builds the building blocks, the electrons, and the quarks of your reality. They've hidden the truth in plain sight. You create the very world that you see. If your subconscious believes the world is flat, then that's what it is. If your subconscious is programmed to believe the world's a spinning globe, then that's what you get. If science shows you a video of the Earth from alleged space, then I believe it will look like a massive toroidal field, just like every other field of energy in this electromagnetic matrix. You're the creators of your existence. There's no real logical reason to continue this debate about the shape of the Earth. It's a toroidal field. The real debate must shift now to how we can eliminate the control mechanisms that have been put into place by the so-called powers that be. Okay, living souls, thank you for listening. I hope you've learned something, and you can see that there's a vast paranormal conspiracy by the mass media industry programming you in ways that you cannot even imagine. If you're interested in reaching your fullest potential, contact me as living souls, and I'll help you implement the solutions that I want to give you, and I'm going to continue them on my shows that you can listen to on Night Dreams Talk Radio.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, Ronald, I'll catch up with you a little bit later on. Thank you very much for your time, and we'll catch up with you soon.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Wow. I actually followed that weirdly. But I'm not sure that you're here or whether I'm just imagining you. So if you are here and you can hear me, this concludes, it concludes our 4 speakers for today. So thank you for your time and your attention. I've certainly come away with, amazing mind shift that I'm sort of wish I hadn't come there. I've had to restart, reboot the operating system.